Apple's iPhone 16 lineup is in the works, and we just got a major leak that confirms a bunch of new details about which Apple Silicon chips are going into each iPhone model next year, as well as the actual performance we should expect from each chip, which I'm going to calculate in this video based on what the new leaks are telling us. But before I get into the major leak that just happened, I want to quickly walk through the history of leaks that we have for these new chips to lay the groundwork before we get into the performance discussion. Back in October, it was confirmed that TSMC, the company that manufactures all of Apple's chips, has already started production of the second generation N3E 3nm chip technology, which is supposed to be more energy efficient than the current N3B that Apple is using for the A18 Pro chip. Now, back in September, Jeff Pu claimed that the regular iPhone 16 and 16 Plus models would come with an enhanced A18 chip with an upgrade to 8GB of memory, but on October 19th, he updated his report to instead say that those new iPhone models will come with the A18 chip, confirming that Apple will no longer be giving the regular iPhones the previous gen chip, which is great news. He even outlined his specific expectations to say that the 16 Pro models will be using the A18 Pro chip, which makes perfect sense because they're using the Pro branding on the current 15 Pro models. And just a couple of days ago, we got the major leak that we're gonna focus on in this video, which does sound a bit confusing at first, but I'll explain what everything means. According to MacRumor sources, early development versions of iOS 18 have already leaked, and there is specific code that points to the actual chip hardware that's coming to the new iPhones. Specifically, we have the code names D47 and D48 for the regular iPhone 16 models, and then D93 and D94 for the Pro models. But as far as the chip, the leaked code revealed that the entire iPhone 16 range will use a new chip codenamed Tahiti with the identifier T8140, which is what Apple calls the A18 chip internally. Now, the weird thing is that this identifier references all 4 of the models, including the Pro models, which doesn't really make sense because we're expecting the Pro models to get the A18 Pro chip and not the regular A18, so let me explain what's going on here. The most logical explanation that makes sense from a technological and economical point of view is that the A18 and A18 Pro are actually the same physical chip using essentially the same design. They'll both have 8GB of RAM as rumored, but since it gets packaged on top of the chip after the fact, Apple can actually use faster and newer RAM or memory on the Pro model chip if they want to do that, while saving money on the regular A18 version by using the previous generation memory. On top of that, Apple can actually disable cores within the same physical chip to differentiate the A18 from the A18 Pro. And to prove that, we actually have the A15 chip from a couple of years ago, which came in 2 different variants. The A15 that went into the regular iPhone 14 models came with a 4-core GPU, while the A15 that went into the Pro models came with a 5-core GPU. But behind the scenes, they were actually the same physical chip with a single GPU core disabled on the regular iPhone 14 models, which was basically a process called chip binning, allowing Apple to still use and sell chips that had manufacturing flaws within a GPU core instead of having to toss the entire chip and waste their money. And the reason this is so important for the A18 and A18 Pro chips is because TSMC's latest 3nm chip technology is known to have yield issues, so using this method of disabling flawed cores on the regular A18 chip will help Apple have more usable chips to sell. So what exactly will the core layout look like on both the A18 and the A18 Pro, and how will they perform? Well, it starts with the brand new M3 Pro chip, because for the first time ever, that specific chip came with a CPU cluster of 6 efficiency cores, which was completely random and didn't make sense at all, because both the regular M3 and M3 Max chips had a 4 E-core cluster, just like the previous M1 and M2 family of chips. So what if this seemingly random 6 E-core cluster is actually borrowed from the design of the upcoming A18 chip, being combined with 2 performance cores, making the first 8-core iPhone chip ever? This is actually a really big deal, because Apple's been using a 6-core layout ever since the A11 chip that went into the iPhone X in 2017. So it might not seem like the performance will improve by that much on the A18 chip, but it's still 33% more E-cores than on the A17 Pro, which will help boost multi-core performance while allowing the E-cores to handle more tasks instead of giving that workload to the 2 performance cores, which will help boost efficiency and battery life. So with that said, what kind of performance jump should we expect from the new A18 and A18 Pro chips? Well, first of all, starting with single core performance, both chips will have the same performance cores running at the same clock speed, so there will be no difference between the two. Now, Apple has recently had a tendency to match the clock speed of new generation A chips to the previous generation M chips. For example, the A14 chip released in 2020 had a 3.0 GHz clock speed, while the M1 released 1 month later had a 3.2 GHz clock speed. Then in 2021, the new A15 chip came in with a matching 3.2 GHz clock speed. The M2 chip later came with a 3.5 GHz clock speed in the summer of 2022, right before the A16 chip came in September with the same 3.5 GHz speed, and then later the A17 Pro came with a 3.8 GHz clock speed, which almost perfectly matches the 3.7 on the M2 Max and the M2 Ultra chips. And now we have the new M3 family of chips clocking in at 4.1 GHz. So I'm fully expecting both of the new A18 chips next year to match that yet again, so we should expect around 3,100 points in Geekbench 6's single core benchmark. Now, in terms of multi-core performance, there's definitely going to be a difference between the A18 and the A18 Pro, seeing as the regular A18 is likely to have 2 of the E-cores disabled for the same 6-core layout as the previous A17 Pro. So as far as the multi-core performance, the A18 chip is likely going to be a little bit faster than the A17 Pro due to the 2 performance cores being clocked higher, but I don't think they're going to clock the E-cores any higher, so there's not going to be any gains from that. But Apple, being Apple, will of course compare the new base A18 chip to the old A16 in the previous regular iPhone 15 models, so it'll still look like a huge upgrade. And then on the new A18 Pro, that chip will have the advantage of higher clock speed on the 2 performance cores and the extra 2 efficiency cores, so we should have a bigger difference here to make it look impressive over the previous A17 Pro chip that they're gonna compare it to. And then finally, we have the GPU core layout, and I believe Apple can easily give the A18 Pro chip a 6-core GPU like what's in the A17 Pro, while disabling one of those GPU cores for the regular A18 to give it a 5-core GPU, just like we have on the previous A16 chip. But I'm not expecting a major improvement on the GPU side, since the only likely difference is going to be a clock speed boost while using the same number of relative GPU cores, so maybe about 15 to 20% faster, and that's it. So with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can subscribe above for more videos like this one, and definitely check out one of those 2 right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.